Welcome back. So what do you think is the top national story this week? We ask because it's like peering into your political soul. Fox News says a crisis has erupted. A caravan of Hondurans, including women and children, are racing towards our southern border. The president is sending troops in lieu of Congress's failure to appropriate money for that border wall, which Mexico is also refusing to pay for. Or what about the draining of the swamp? President Trump says EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt renting a room from a D.C. lobbyist for $50 a night, firing his security detail for not using lights and sirens to get him through traffic. The stock market is tanking in response to the president's tariffs on China. A really bad jobs report. The Trump administration finally sanctioning Russian oligarchs for messing with our election. I could have gone on and on, but I would have to say thanks for joining us. Good night. Joining us for more is Jack Brill, Vice Chair of the Sarasota Republican Party, Kevin Griffith, the Vice Chair of the Sarasota Democratic Party, and Elizabeth DeGinis, a reporter for the Herald Tribune. Thank you all for joining us tonight. And let's start with the EPA Administrator, Scott Pruitt. And Jack, I'll start with you, of course, because a lot of Republicans have rallied around the president since the campaign with the slogan, "Drain the swamp." And you look at the EPA administrator renting a condo room for $50 a night from a lobbyist. Is that draining the swamp?
You can lead, what's the old, you can lead the cow to water, but you can't make them drink. You know, you can bring in good people, the president has done. If they have actions that don't befit the office, you know, and don't have their own personal conduct where it should be in an office of that nature, you know, you have to.
And why is he still there? Not only is he still there, but earlier this week the president was still considering to replace Jeff Sessions as Attorney General.
But we all know that one of the things that our President Trump likes to do is to throw something out when his strategy is probably in a totally different direction. You never know, based on daily statements, which direction will be the final action. So I'm sure that he is, you know, obviously he wants to get the most done while he's in office and get the economy where he wants it to be and regulations lessened. So, you know, stay tuned. It'll change by Monday.
Alan, I find it hypocritical because Trump ran on corruption or anti-corruption, and I'm looking at my list here. Scott Pruitt, government-funded first-class travel, government-funded soundproof telephone booth in his office.
You watch Get Smart.
Falling behind on this rent that you mentioned. I read an article about intimidating an EPA official who just left, making them sign non-disclosure agreements. It's just hypocritical.
Elizabeth, you have your finger on the pulse of this community here, and when you read the comments, usually it is Trump is draining the swamp. He is putting it to the establishment in Washington. When folks around here hear about the EPA administrator and all this stuff, does this resonate at all?
You know, I think it's hard to say. I think Trump has a very devoted kind of core fan base, and maybe to some extent they're kind of going to support him no matter what. It's hard to say what people feel locally, but I think that, you know, the jury's still out, obviously, on Scott Pruitt. He hasn't kind of made a firm claim either way what he's going to do, so I think we just kind of have to see how it goes. All
right, let me bring up one other thing, and we might continue it into the next segment, but that is what the Trump administration is calling the crisis at the border. Jack, I was under the impression that illegal border crossings are at a low that we have not seen for 20 years. So why are we rushing U.S. troops to secure the border from the Hondurans?
It's not any different than President Bush putting 6,000 to 8,000 troops in. It's not any different than President Obama bringing troops down there. We have a very open, porous border. And with all the technology, you still need to have boots on the ground to make sure that we keep, you know, when people come into this country, they come in legally. And
you know, Kevin, this is something that most people, Democrats and Republicans, do not support, illegal border crossings. We have not gotten the wall, so what is wrong with what the president is doing?
Well, here's the thing. We do want secure borders, but the National Guard being sent to the border is expensive. It's very expensive, and it's a question to the American people of where do you want your money best spent. Just so you know, I read an article that says here in the state of Florida, school security is going to cost $400 million. That's to keep our children safe. And the president has apparently decided that sending our National Guard troops to the border is the highest priority.
Be that as it may, Elizabeth, is this smart politics and appealing to one's base?
Well, I think we have to look at, obviously, Trump really campaigned on immigration. I mean, build a wall is kind of the refrain we heard over and over during the campaign. So I feel like, you know, a lot of people probably have been saying he hasn't been doing enough for immigration, and this is a kind of a way for him to take a firmer stance on that.
Okay, we are just getting warmed up, and we'll have much more on the Week in Washington right after we check the First Alert weather. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are talking about the week in Washington, and joining us for more are Jack Brill, Vice Chair of the Sarasota Republican Party, Kevin Griffith, the Vice Chair of the Sarasota Democratic Party, and Elizabeth DeGenis, a reporter for the Herald Tribune. Let's talk about the tariffs that the president is announcing against China. Now China is announcing tariffs against us. And this, again, Jack, is something that plays to the president's base, and it's a legitimate point. China has been unfair in terms of its trade practices, but now look what's happening to the stock market. At one point today, it was down almost 700 points, and that cannot make Republicans and Democrats and independents happy about anything.
But you have to play out, you know, we don't have a trade war. Yes, China has been grossly unfair to a lot of products and services and also technology. And that's been, you know, who knows what the intellectual costs of that are over time. But tariffs they're never a winner in the long run, but at the same time, everyone's doing their positioning, we're picking through, and we're going to do this category, we're doing this category. You notice China hasn't done airplanes yet, as an example, with all the Boeing. So then there'll be some negotiations, and then we'll, hopefully get us on a better playing field. The question is, when you tariff steel, is that really going to bring back steel plants in Pittsburgh and the Ohio Valley? Probably not. With the technology today, will that bring back jobs to human beings versus robots? Those are all things. So it's a starting point. Who knows where it'll end up.
Kevin, Democrats have been concerned about this for many years too, and doesn't the president have a support that prior administrations, Obama and Bush going back, did not do anything, and by God, he is.
I'm totally not opposed to tariffs on certain products, and I think in places, I'm born in Ohio, so I know in Ohio and Michigan, places like that, strategic tariffs can be popular. The issue with Trump is, again, just how Trump is. It's chaotic. It's $50 billion last week. Now we hear of another $100 billion in tariffs. And yes, you saw the stock market sink. You also saw China retaliate with products from those Trump states of soy and agriculture, and that can have an impact.
And to the point of that, the one thing that you've got to be careful when you pick these categories, pork producers in Iowa, that's a $40 billion, it's a huge number of exports. Whoever knew that China was the largest,
That's
importer,
exactly what is being set up right now.
And that does present a problem for those poor farmers.
And that, the interesting part of this, Elizabeth, is that if there is a negative impact in terms of Chinese tariffs against us, it will be in the Rust Belt, it will be in the agricultural areas. But around here, does it not sound pretty good? Because we don't necessarily have a dog in the fight in terms of our economy around here. So it plays well to the president's base in Florida.
I mean, I think it's hard to say. I think you have to think on a more national level. And it is interesting that these tariffs that, you might say some Trump supporters would advocate for could end up disproportionately hurting states that went for Trump. So I think it's too early to tell, obviously, but I think we'll just have to see how it all.
The other big news today was the Trump administration is finally imposing new sanctions on Putin's cronies. And, Kevin, this is something the Democrats have been yelling about for a long time now. Why is this administration or this president not doing anything about Putin and his cronies after their involvement in the 2016 election? Well, you know what? They are now.
Okay, and I haven't followed that today, but good. Finally, they have. I think the bigger issue that's come out this past week is Cambridge Analytica and the Trump campaign purchasing data that Cambridge Analytica had scraped from Facebook. And so all of you out there who have Facebook and think that some of your stuff is private, that micro data was collected by a British company and then apparently sold to the Trump or people affiliated with the Trump campaign. That's a bigger issue.
That's Facebook's fault. for not having the proper security and not having, having control of where the information and it's our information, where it's going. So if, the Trump campaign is contracting with a company that has that information, it's not the Trump campaign's fault that they went and got it illegally.
It is their job to be ethical, though.
But I will say this: there was, since the beginning of this Russian debacle, a lot of Republicans have said, you know what, it didn't change my vote, and there's no evidence that any of this fake news that was circulated by the Russian bots did affect the election. A new study came out today, Jack, that said that in fact it did.
I haven't seen that study, so I can't give you an answer on that one right now.
Okay.
So, but I want to go back. Let's go back to the Russian billionaires that, where the Mueller investigation is going. What is their interviewing? There was a story of one of them landed in New York, and the agent seized the plane, went through all their computers. And what they're targeting, it's not the Trump administration, but there seem to be going tighter controls over Manafort and Gates. They continue to build those cases against those two individuals.
Paul Manafort, who was his campaign manager of his presidency.
And who did a lot of different side businesses on the other side. The other thing that, which is what you'll watch, is not what control we can have against those folks when seizing their assets. It's what will our European partners do, because a lot of those folks in Russia have a lot of interest in Europe and Britain and Greece and Cyprus. So if our European counterparts act like they should, then that can really strangle them.
Kevin, you are a defense attorney. The other news that came out this week is that according to the president's defense attorneys, he was informed by Mueller's probe that he is the subject of this investigation. He is not a target of the investigation. What does that mean to you?
Not much. I mean, a subject can turn into a target. That just means that they're still uncovering information, and I guess maybe he's not the sole focus at this time, but if they uncover information that shows that he did something, he certainly will become a target.
Couldn't a subject also even be as much as just a witness in the process?
But there are three levels: witness, subject, and target. A subject is not a witness.
Okay. But it's not a target.
Elizabeth, but let me ask you this. In terms of people who live here on the Suncoast and the Sarasota area, are we still at the point that Republicans, by and large, really don't give a hoot about the Russia investigation, but it's the Democrats who are energized and really concerned about it?
I mean, I think you hear about the Russia investigation so much in the news now, it's kind of hard to ignore. I think that there are probably always going to be some people who think there was no collusion, and no matter what the evidence is, I mean, either way, are going to say that that's what happened. I think that, obviously the investigation is ongoing, as we can see by the fact that these Russian oligarchs were detained. So I think that we just kind of have to
Finally, the story that everyone loves to hate, and that's Stormy Daniels. The president finally talking about it publicly the other day, saying that he was unaware that his lawyer, Michael Cohen, paid off Stormy Daniels. It has set up a different situation in terms of that legal case. Jack, I have heard people speak about this, that in some ways this case presents more of a danger to the president than even the Russia investigation.
It really doesn't. It's not, if Michael Cohen, however the contracts are drawn up, Michael Cohen did it, Michael paid for it. The president was not involved in it. As he said on Air Force One, he did not have any knowledge of it. His attorney handled it. If you had any questions, talk to his attorney.
But let me ask you this. A story came out today that several evangelical Christian leaders are planning to sit down with the president in June over these allegations and over the payoff to Stormy Daniels, and said the leader of one ministry, we are very concerned. These are things that are like fingernails on the chalkboard to people of faith. That is not who we are. This is not the fruit of the Spirit. That's not leading with humility. Evangelical Christians are a base of the president's support. Are you concerned about that? Because there are a lot of them around here.
This reminds me of the 90s when Jesse Jackson and Reverend Al Sharpton were going to sit down with President Clinton after all of those issues. It's like Groundhog Day. You keep hearing these stories in different administrations. Hopefully they'll get it straightened out. I just don't think it's that.
Alan, I just say it's about time. The evangelicals look at President Trump and at least judge him for his character. They've followed him wholeheartedly to date, despite his many flaws, and we all know his many flaws. And I just think character is an issue. It's the presidency. You know, I want to be able to turn on the TV in the morning and find out what's going on and not hear about Stormy Daniels.
Okay. We have to take a quick break, and we'll be back for final thoughts in just a moment. Welcome back, and our guests join us right now for final thoughts. There was a really fascinating Tiger Bay meeting this week, and involved the issue of the state legislation on gun safety and in the aftermath of the Parkland shooting. And Jack, one of the most interesting parts of that was Senator Greg Steube saying one of the reasons why he was opposed to the legislation that passed in the legislature and was signed into law by this governor, and that is that it requires local communities to spend a lot of money in terms of school resource officers, and the state did not provide any funding to do that or much funding to do that, and that, according to the senator, is an unfunded mandate, which Republicans are usually against.
No, there was $400 million.
Not enough to cover the cost of putting school resource officers in every elementary and middle school classroom in Florida.
But there was a lot of money put towards that. Obviously, you know, the Parkland shootings changed everything in Tallahassee, and it brought a focus to, we've got to take care of our children. How I think this is going to be an evolutionary process over a year or two. The first thing is we've got to make sure our schools are defendable, have the resource officers in there. There needs to be a collaborative between the state and local to, but I think you're going to see what happened this year in the funding. Then we'll figure out what works. Then next year will be another year.
Elizabeth, you were there this week, and it looks like a battle royale between the sheriff's office and the school board.
Well, I think first to start with the funding numbers, I mean, one of the things Steube said at the panel was that it would take $450 million to fund school resource officers in every school in the state. So just to kind of give you some context, $400 million is the total package, but that's obviously not the total money going towards school resource officers. So here we got about, I think, a total of, I want to say 2.4 from the state, but it's like a 1.3 million new funding, and that's not going to be enough to fund.
And Kevin, I want to give you the last word there.
I know this is probably going to be recorded, but I actually agree with Senator Steube on this issue.
Mark the time and date.
Wow, look at that one.
A certain place may have just frozen over. But yeah, I mean, law enforcement officers, resource officers that are armed in those schools, and it's not paid for. And the state legislature could have paid for it, and they didn't.
Okay, we'll have to end it right there.